Hi everyone, my name is Dhruv Sharma and I welcome you all on our new session on setting up remote access VPN on Cisco ASAs using certificate-based authentication on Cisco ASA, but authorization is configured on Cisco ISE. So what we're trying to achieve in this session is not to educate everyone how to set up VPN on ASAs. I think there are enough YouTube videos or online articles to show how to set up VPNs on ASA, and there are already enough articles which guide how to configure authentication on Cisco ASAs using certificate. But what we are trying to demonstrate is how we can split the responsibilities of authentication on Cisco ASAs and authorization on Cisco ISE. So ASAs will only deal with authentication and authorization will be dealt by Cisco ISE, which is acting as a radius server. On that note, let's jump in. So as we mentioned just a minute back about the introduction, the users will be end users. Let's suppose this is user X. He's a remote access VPN users, will be connecting to the remote access uh, VPN terminator, VPN appliance, which in our case is Cisco ASAs. He will be authenticated on Cisco ASAs using certificates. So once the user authentication is successful, Cisco ASA will refer this connection to Cisco ISE for authorization. Cisco ISE is already is a well-known radius server. It will receive the authorization request from Cisco ASA, and based on the attributes of user X, it will align, it will assign some right authorization profiles to the user X, and that authorization profile will be downloaded on Cisco ASA. For example, this user X is part of team sales. It will present a certificate to Cisco ASA. This certificate is sent to Cisco ASA. Cisco ASA will validate this certificate which was received by user X, who is part of AD group sales. It will forward post successful authentication. It will forward the attributes of user X, primarily the name, is sent to Cisco ISE. Cisco ISE will receive the username. It will find whether this user X is indeed part of AD group sales. Based on its authorization profiles, it will be allowed or disallowed to access certain resources. That profile or the policies will be downloaded on Cisco ASA for this session, and then this user X will be able to access sales server. So in this way, the user is authenticated and authorized, but ASA is only dealing with, in this case, this is ASA. ASA is only dealing with only authentication, but not for authorization, because it has outsourced its authorization to Cisco ISE. So I think a couple of things which I personally struggled when I was building this in my lab was how Cisco ISE will only deal with authorization as ASA terminates authentication onto itself, and ASA doesn't pass the certificates to Cisco ISE. So when Cisco ISE receive those authorization packets, and then the authentication is bound to fail. So because in this packet, what ASA sends to Cisco ISE, it doesn't have any passwords or any certificate. So when this request from user X or sales user will receive Cisco ISE, Cisco ISE will fail the authentication, but directly uh, access the authorization policies to map user X to the right sales authorization profiles to access the communication. We have to bypass authentication on Cisco ISE in this case, guys, which is the key uh, a key observation from my side when I was building this setup in my lab. So this is the topology which I will be using in today's session. There are two users, Simon and Vinod. Simon is part of user group sales, and Vinod is part of AD group finance. So if I show you my lab as well, okay. So if I bring back my topology, so we have AD group. This is my Active Directory. So we have two groups, finance and sales. Sales has two users, David and Simon, and finance have a user, Vinod. So this is my domain controller. If I show you back my topology, Simon and David, they both are part of sales group, which are part of the domain controller cisco.com. And similarly, Vinod is part of finance. They both are employees of Cisco, and they have an account on the Active Directory. Cisco ISE is already connected to our Active Directory, which I will shortly demonstrate that in the lab. And uh, and as you can see that Cisco ASA is also integrated with Cisco ISE, which an ASA is already configured with certificate-based authentication on ASA, and it will communicate with Cisco ISE for authorization. So if I again brief you the process, the sales user will send its certificate request uh, to Cisco ASA. All these employees of Cisco, Simon and Vinod, will be installed with a user certificate on their machines. And this certificate's root certificate only needs to be installed on Cisco ASA. I will repeat myself again. The root certificate needs to be there on ASA. The user certificate should be on the client machines. And in past of authentication, when the user will log in on their AnyConnect profiles, they will be sending their certificate to Cisco ASA. ASA will authenticate it. But for authorization, ASA will send the authorization request to Cisco ISE. ISE will look into the AD groups. ASA will never send certificate to Cisco ISE. It will only uh, pick up the CN name from the certificate, which will be Simon and Vinod. It will extract the information from the certificate, and it will forward that information to Cisco ISE. And Cisco ISE will take that name, which it received from Cisco ASA, search it in its database, and find the right AD group this user is part of. And based on the AD group authorization policies, it will decide if if sales user can access 10.10.10, or finance can access 10.10.10.11. I hope the lab topology is clear. If you have any questions, please post those questions in the comment section below. And obviously, you guys can access the link for this presentation from the description section. Well, first thing first, guys, I will briefly walk you through the configuration steps, what I performed to build up my lab. I know there are already enough YouTube articles or Cisco articles how to configure certificate-based authentication on ASAs, but I just quickly walk you through. First thing I did, I installed the root CA on Cisco ASA. I used ASDM for it. It was easy to browse and upload it. Only root CA certificate goes into ASA. The user certificate goes the into the client machines. We configure the tunnel groups. As you can see, the tunnel groups are pretty simple. It only have authentication pointing towards the certificate, nothing else. It's very simple configuration of ASA. And finally, you can see that we have lots of group policy, and none of the group policy is basically mapped to tunnel group, because group policy assignment for the users will happen through Radius server. So what I mean, when a user from sales team will authenticate from ASA and then authorized from ISE, ISE will decide whether this user X is from sales group, AD group, or finance AD group. Based on the decision will be sent to ASA, and that decision will determine which group policy user will get. If the user is part of sales AD group, he will get sales group policy, and once he gets the sales group policy, eventually he will get the DNS server, he will get the VPN address pool, and you can basically configure all sort of privileges based on the group policy. So I think I won't go into further details what are group policies and what can we not do using group policies. So a quick demo of how the authentication will look like. The user will connect as it shows below. He will be asked to present a certificate, and he did. And finally, he was able to connect to the ASAs. And right now we're only talking about from the authentication perspective. But now let's discuss about authorization. L- how we can configure authorization on Cisco ASA. First thing first, I configured Radius server pointing towards Cisco ISE. And finally, I have added the authorization configuration as well. Previously, it only had a certificate, but now we have authorization. Nice and easy. And on the ISE front, we have to add, if you remember, we first added ISE on ASA. Now we have to add ASA on ISE. ASA is added, and that's his management address. I configured ISE to talk to our domain controller, and I imported two AD groups into Cisco ISE, one for the finance, one for the sales. And the last thing, which is pretty simple, is the third step. I created the authorization profiles for the sales user and mapped a group policy under the VPN attribute or under the radius attribute ASA VPN. So what happens, any user who gets this authorization profile, ICE will make sure that he gets the group policy underscore sales. So guys, this goes back to the same group policy which I have mentioned over here. So you need to use the same group policy what was defined in this slide or in this step. And finally, we need to go back and create policies under the policy sets. As you can see, we created the sales VPN policy or finance VPN policy pointing towards the AAA server. And we have specified if authentication fails, uh, you need to specify continue to the next step, because we know that authentication will fail without any doubt about it, because authentication is not performed on Cisco ISE. Because when Cisco ISE received those authorization packets from Cisco ASA, ISE extract that information from the certificate, which includes username only, not the password. So that when the ISE received that certificate from the end users, it extracts only the CN name of the certificate. If CN name is Simon, then that CN name will be sent in that packet back to Cisco ISE. So ISE will receive the CN name, but since the password is missing, authentication is bound to fail. And we are accepting that to happen. And that's why we say that if the authentication is failing, please continue. But yes, authorization is pretty important. We specify that if the user is part of sales group, AD group, assign him the sales profile. As I mentioned, these are the packet captures what we did. As you can see over here, only username was sent over here. The password was empty. And we have seen in our labs, the password was bound to fail and the authentication was failing. You guys can access this information, these slides from the description section below. Without wasting any of the time, let's jump into the lab. The labs will be exciting because technically, I literally struggled building this infrastructure in my lab, and I went through multiple uh, options and multiple hit and tries to finally reach to this conclusion and finally make this pattern working. Well, if I quickly re-show you the topology, just for rebriefing purposes after the theory. Uh, pa- 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 pa. So these two users, sales and finance, will be connecting to the ASAs, and this is the ASA configuration. If I show you the ASA configuration first, this is our lovingly ASA. Show running tunnel group, and tunnel group is pretty simple. Nothing fancy in the configuration. It is only using certificate-based authentication, and I upload the certificate using ASDM, as I mentioned in my slides. An authorization is configured with Cisco ISE. See, it's Cisco ISE, and I can surely ping it. Perfect. This authentication is working, and will surely demonstrate you the same in the lab. So ASA can ping Cisco ISE, and ISE must be integrated with the domain controller, which I will show you shortly. And this VPN gateway is also configured with some group policies. These are the group policies which I have configured. One is the sales group policy, and second is the finance group policy. So sales and finance group policy have a split ACL configured, address pools configured, sales address pool for sales, finance address pool for finance. So if I show access list, as you can see, the split ACL, which both group policies are aligned to, is 10.0.0.0/8, which is the local LAN in my environment. As I can show you, this is my local LAN, which has a /8 network, where I have two web servers, server 1 and server 2, which are configured. pretty straightforward flat lab, which I have in my environment. And and so I have two local pools, the IP local pools, which decides what will be the IP addresses which will be given to sales user and to the finance users. So sales user will get uh, an IP from 12 series, and finance will get a IP from 13 series. And then once the authentication authorization are completed, the user will access my local LAN environment from 10.0.0.0/8 network. But obviously, sales user cannot access everything. It will be restricted to access only sales server, not the finance server. And that authorization or the control will be governed by radius server. And there are group policies, sales group policy and the finance group policy. The finance group policy will be assigned to the finance users who are authorized to be the who are part of the authorized finance AD groups. Yeah. So okay. So I think I did showed you the my domain controller. So user Vinod, he's indeed part of AD group finance, and sales David is indeed part of AD group sales. And what else? Let me show you the Cisco ISE in our lab. Cisco ISE is already integrated with our Active Directory, uh, cisco.com, which I showed you a minute back. And we have already imported two groups, sales and finance, from the domain controller. And what else? And I indeed have added my Cisco ASA, as I showed in the slide. That's the IP address of my Cisco ASA, and that's a radius key. What else? That is it, guys. It's the configuration is pretty straightforward, and I think this is the identity source sequence group which I have created, which have the domain controller cisco.com and the internal users. I am not using internal users for authentication or authorization, so it doesn't really matter. But finally, the last piece is to configure the authorization profiles under policy sets. I configured remote access VPN policy. That's an IP address of my Cisco ASA. If I show you so this is the name of the tunnel group which I've configured on my Cisco ASA. As you can see, and the IP address of my Cisco ASA, I can show you. I'm not bluffing. Okay, 55, and I have added over here, and pointing towards the identity group. If you closely monitor, I'm not configuring my eyes to perform authentication. And I'm pretty sure the authentication will fail because authentication is performed on Cisco ASAs, not on Cisco ISE. That's why we have to make sure that we pass these authentication and these steps and ask them to continue to the next step. But carefully, we have configured our authorization in this case. Oops. Our authorization policies. In the authorization policies, we have configured some policies for both sales and finance users. The sales users, what I did, external group sales equals sales, and that's an SIP of Cisco ASA. I'm pointing it towards the sales attribute. If I show you the sales attributes, So this is the group policy, the authorization policy I was talking about. Similarly, if the user is part of finance AD group with this re- coming from this Cisco ASA IP address 1111.55, he will get a finance authorization profile. Oops, what happened? Yeah, yeah, sorry. So these are the authorization profiles. If I show you the authorization profiles, the sales user will get a downloadable ACL, sales ACL, and he will get a VPN group policy, and its name is group policy underscore sales. Similarly, finance user will get a uh, DACL or a downloadable ACL in form of a finance ACL with group policy finance. What I will repeat myself. I will repeat myself is uh, the user from Active Directory group sales will get a sales profile, and the users from finance AD group will get a finance profile. The finance profile will make sure that the group policy which will be assigned to the from the authorization is the finance group policy. Along with the group policy, we are also pushing the DACL or a downloadable ACL, finance ACL, and sales ACL respectively. If I briefly show you my ACLs, sales ACL for the sales user will permit this user to access 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, and finance users can access 10, 10, 10, 10, 11. So sales users will get sales group policy. Along with the group policy, it will also get a DACL or a ACL. Similarly, the finance user will get a finance group policy along with a ACL, which will restrict finance access to only 10, 10, 10, 10.11. I hope you are able to understand how we have configured our lab environment. And finally, the last piece is the user connectivity. This guy is user David, and we did showed you that David is part of group, sales group, and finance. We know this part of finance. So we have two users. This is Vinod, finance. This is user David from sales. Now, these users are trying to access the VPN. Let's try. I will let Vinod uh, connect to the VPN as well. This is Vinod. Okay, David received. So David is asked to present his certificate, and David is presenting its VPN certificate to the VPN. And similarly, Vinod, who is part of the finance group, is also asked to present its certificate. The certificate are presented in both cases. Now, this is a generic tunnel group on the ASA. Till now, the authentication will be performed, and now both users will be will be connected to the right group policy based on their authorization attributes. So let's see in the background what happened on the on the radius server or Cisco ISE. David and Vinod did contacted uh, Cisco ISE for authorization. For this user, David, authentication succeeded, and finally authentication was failed. So authentication was attempted, authentication got failed, and I mentioned that this is an expected response because authentication was never performed on Cisco ISE. Authentication was performed only on ASA. So ASA only extracted the CN name from the certificate and presented back to Cisco ISE. But Cisco ISE did checked the CN name and the OU name is or rest of the Active Directory attributes, and based on that, uh, Cisco ISE pres- uh, gave him the necessary privileges, and he was able to download that ACL as well. So if I showed you this for uh, David, David was downloaded the DACL as well. If I go back on Cisco ASA briefly, show VPN session DB, any connect. So luckily, both of our employees from Cisco, Vinod and David, are able to connect to the VPN successfully. Vinod got an IP from 13 series range, and David got an IP from 12 series range. Vinod has a group policy aligned from finance because Vinod is from finance AD group, and David is assigned a group policy from sales since he's from sales AD group. Let's see, show access list. We also downloaded some dynamic ACLs uh, from our Cisco ISE, which allow finance users to access 10.10.10.11 and sales user access 10.10.10.10. Although the split tunnel ACL, if I show you briefly, allowed both sales and finance users to, yeah, that's the one. So finance user to have access to complete 10.00/8. But because of the downloadable ACL, their accesses are further restricted. So we'll prove it. Technically, Vinod, who's part of finance group, should only able to access 10.10.10.11 only. Let's check it. So this guy is indeed Vinod, and now he is connected to the VPN. So he will try to connect to 10.10.10.11, and indeed he is able to connect to it. But if this user is trying to attempt to connect to 10.10.10.10, his connection will not work because of the policies or the access list which are downloaded from the Radius server only allows the finance users to access finance group policy. If I show you the show access list, the head counts will increase. The finance head count is 1, which shows that yes, our finance user did try to connect to 10.10.10.11. Initially, it was 0. But now we need to verify whether the sales user is able to access 10.10.10.10. In that case, it will be David, who is part of sales AD group. Oops. 10.10. He is able to access 10.10.10.10, but he should not be able to access the finance server 10.10.10.11. Oops. No, he can't. If I go back and rerun this command, I can see I should be able to see the head counts for 10.10.10.10. Yes, I can, but the user was not able to access 10.10.11 in case of sales, but he was able to access 10.10.10.10. So that proved the case that right authorization policies, if we configure it on Cisco ISE, we can easily deploy this solution. To be honest, guys, I've personally struggled setting this up in my lab, and I thought I would like to share my knowledge or share my experience with the rest of you all. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop comments below, and I will try my level best to respond back to you all. I hope this session was informative, and I would like to thank you for joining.